The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as the crowd settled into their seats. A sea of scientists, engineers, journalists, and curious onlookers eager to hear from the man who promised to make humanity a multiplanetary species. The SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, was alive with energy. Towering rocket models flanked the stage, their metallic surfaces gleaming under the spotlight. Screens displayed looping videos of successful launches, while a soft hum of futuristic music set the tone for the evening. Among the attendees was Abigail Wright, a bright-eyed 10-year-old who clutched a small notebook filled with hand-drawn sketches of rockets and constellations. Abigail's father, an aerospace engineer and a longtime admirer of Elon Musk, had secured 2 tickets to the event, knowing his daughter would treasure the experience. Abigail, though young, had an insatiable curiosity for the universe. Her nights were spent poring over astronomy books, her room adorned with glow-in-the-dark stars and a poster of the Andromeda Galaxy. This event, she thought, was the closest she'd ever get to the stars she dreamed of. As the lights dimmed, a hush fell over the room. Then, with a burst of applause, Elon Musk walked onto the stage, dressed in his signature black jacket and jeans. He exuded an air of casual brilliance. Musk began outlining SpaceX's latest advancements: a reusable rocket capable of round-trip journeys to Mars, advancements in satellite technology, and his vision of creating a self-sustaining colony on the Red Planet. Abigail listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. Musk's words painted vivid pictures of a future where humanity was no longer confined to Earth, where children like her could grow up exploring the vastness of space. But as he spoke, a question began to form in her mind, one she couldn't ignore. Musk had spoken passionately about science, technology, and exploration. But what about the deeper meaning behind it all? What about the mysteries that science couldn't explain? When the Q&A session began, Abigail hesitated, unsure if her voice would matter in a room filled with adults. Yet, as one person after another asked technical questions about propulsion systems and funding, she felt a surge of determination. Tentatively, she raised her hand, her small figure barely visible in the crowd. To her surprise, one of the moderators pointed to her. "You in the front," the moderator said, gesturing toward Abigail. A microphone was handed to her, and she stood up, her heart pounding. Musk's sharp, inquisitive eyes fixed on her, encouraging her to speak. "Mr. Musk," Abigail began, her voice trembling but clear, "you've talked a lot about exploring the universe, but what about the one who created it? Do you believe in God?" A ripple of murmur spread through the audience, and for a moment, the air seemed to freeze. Musk, visibly caught off guard, tilted his head, a small, bemused smile playing on his lips. "That's an interesting question," he said, leaning slightly forward. "I guess you could say I'm agnostic. I believe in what I can see and prove. The universe is full of wonders, but I prefer to focus on what we can understand and achieve." Abigail nodded thoughtfully, but before she could respond, the moderator thanked her and moved on to the next question. The moment might have passed quietly in the room, but online, it was an entirely different story. The event was live-streamed to millions, and within minutes, clips of Abigail's question began circulating on social media. Some praised her courage and curiosity. Others criticized her for asking such a question at a scientific event. By the time Abigail and her father returned home that evening, her name was already trending. News outlets debated the exchange with headlines like "Elon Musk confronted by 10-year-old on faith" and "Child sparks debate on God and science." Abigail, unaware of the storm she had ignited, lay in bed that night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. She couldn't shake Musk's answer from her mind. Did he really not believe in anything greater? How could someone who looked at the same stars she did not feel the same awe? Unbeknownst to her, the simple question of a little girl was about to spark a cultural phenomenon, challenging not only Musk's beliefs but also the world's perceptions of faith, science, and the mysteries that bind them together. The morning after the SpaceX event, Abigail Wright woke to the sound of her mother's voice calling her down for breakfast. It was a Saturday, and she had planned to spend the day finishing a school project about the solar system. But as she shuffled into the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she noticed her father staring at his phone, his face a mixture of pride and concern. "Sweetheart," he began, setting the phone down. "Do you remember the question you asked Mr. Musk last night?" Abigail nodded, grabbing a piece of toast. "Of course, why?" "Well," her father said, turning the screen toward her, "you've gone viral." The word viral meant little to Abigail, but as she peered at the screen, she saw a clip of herself from the event. Her small frame, her question, Musk's response. It was all there. The video had been shared thousands of times, accompanied by captions like, "The little girl who challenged Elon Musk," and "Faith versus science." A 10-year-old sparks debate. Abigail's eyes widened as she scrolled through the comments. Some called her brave and wise beyond her years, while others were less kind, accusing her of being coached or calling her question inappropriate. "What does this mean?" Abigail asked, her voice trembling. Her mother sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It means a lot of people are talking about what you said, honey. Some are inspired and some, well, not everyone will agree with you." By mid-morning, the phone at the Wright household wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters from local and national outlets wanted interviews, and neighbors began dropping by with mixed reactions. Abigail's best friend, Mia, called to say how cool it was that her question had been seen by millions. But at school, not everyone was as enthusiastic. On Monday, Abigail noticed classmates whispering behind her back, and one boy in her science class teased her, calling her the God Girl. Her teacher, Mrs. Eldridge, tried to comfort her. "Abigail," she said after class, "don't let anyone make you feel bad about asking questions. That's how we learn." But it wasn't just school where the fallout hit. Journalists began showing up at her family's modest suburban home, hoping to interview the little girl who had stood up to Elon Musk. Abigail's parents, private people by nature, felt torn. They didn't want their daughter to be overwhelmed, but they also understood the significance of the moment. Her father, particularly proud of her curiosity and courage, agreed to let one local news station do a short interview, on the condition that they not press her on controversial topics. The interview aired that evening, with Abigail shyly recounting her experience at the SpaceX event. "I just wanted to know what he thought," she said, clutching her notebook. "I think it's important to ask big questions about the universe and about life." Her sincerity struck a chord with viewers, but the interview only added fuel to the fire. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like Abigail Asks and Faith versus Science. Religious leaders praised her as a symbol of youthful faith, while skeptics dismissed her as naive. Abigail's family began receiving letters, some encouraging and heartfelt, others harsh and critical. One letter simply read, "Keep your religion out of science." The whirlwind left Abigail confused and overwhelmed. She hadn't intended to start a debate or become the center of attention. She had only wanted to satisfy her curiosity. Her parents tried to shield her from the negativity, but it was impossible to escape entirely. At church, her pastor praised her bravery and encouraged the congregation to pray for her strength. Abigail appreciated the support but felt conflicted. Was she brave, or had she just spoken without thinking? That night, after the house had quieted, Abigail sat by her bedroom window, gazing up at the stars. They seemed farther away than they had the night before. She thought about Musk's answer, about how he had admitted his agnosticism so matter-of-factly. Did he really not wonder about the same things she did when he looked at the night sky? Or had he just stopped asking? Abigail clutched her notebook, scribbling down her thoughts in messy handwriting. What if someone else asked Musk the same question? Would he think differently? Maybe he just needs someone to explain it better. For the first time, Abigail felt the weight of her question and the unexpected responsibility it had brought. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. She wasn't ready to stop asking. The stars, after all, held too many mysteries to ignore. Elon Musk sat in his sprawling office at SpaceX headquarters, scrolling through his phone as headlines about the now-famous encounter filled his feed. The clip of the little girl asking him about his beliefs had gone viral in ways even he hadn't anticipated. Musk was no stranger to public scrutiny or controversy, but this was different. The question had been simple, almost innocent, yet it had touched a nerve across the world. He leaned back in his chair, replaying the video. Abigail Wright's voice was steady but curious, cutting through the noise of the event. Musk found himself strangely moved by her boldness. In his world, where adults tread carefully around his reputation, here was a child asking him something profoundly personal with no agenda. It wasn't the question itself that lingered. It was the look in her eyes, the genuine search for an answer. The reaction online was impossible to ignore. Religious leaders were praising Abigail as a beacon of faith, while skeptics debated whether Musk should have engaged more directly. Some accused him of evading the question, while others applauded his honesty in admitting he didn't have all the answers. The debate spilled into news outlets and late-night talk shows, making Musk the unwitting face of a larger cultural conversation. Musk's closest advisors had already weighed in. His communications team suggested a carefully worded statement to address the situation, but Musk was hesitant. He didn't like being forced into a corner, especially on matters as personal as his beliefs. Yet, he also knew that staying silent could allow others to define the narrative for him. That evening, Musk drafted a tweet, carefully choosing his words. "Faith and science are not enemies. My beliefs are personal, but I respect Abigail's courage to ask meaningful questions. Curiosity is the key to understanding our universe." The tweet was sent and immediately went viral. The tone was neutral, attempting to bridge the divide without committing to one side or the other. Musk hoped it would quell the firestorm, but instead, it only deepened the conversation. People dissected his words, analyzing every nuance. Was he softening his stance? Was he avoiding the issue? The world demanded more clarity, but Musk remained silent. Privately, the incident began to stir something in him. Musk wasn't a man who avoided big questions. He had built his career on them. The universe, with all its vastness and mysteries, was his playground. Yet, when it came to existential matters, faith, purpose, the possibility of a creator, he had always sidestepped them. He preferred the tangible, the provable. It was easier to build rockets than to grapple with the unanswerable. Still, Abigail's question stuck with him. He found himself reflecting on his childhood in South Africa, where he had attended an Anglican Sunday school. Though he had never been deeply religious, those early experiences had planted seeds of wonder about the universe's origins. Over the years, his scientific pursuits had overshadowed those questions, but they had never truly disappeared. That night, Musk sat alone on the balcony of his Los Angeles home, staring up at the stars. The city's light pollution dimmed their brilliance, but he could still make out a few constellations. He thought about the vastness of space, the billions of galaxies, the incomprehensible scale of it all. It was humbling. For the first time in years, he felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. A longing, perhaps, or an unanswered question tugging at the edges of his mind. He opened a book he hadn't touched in years, Carl Sagan's Cosmos. The passages about humanity's place in the universe struck a chord. Sagan's words reminded Musk of the awe that had first driven him to explore space, the same awe he saw in Abigail's eyes. Could that be a bridge between science and faith? Did it even matter? The next morning, Musk met with his executive team. "Let's take a different approach," he said. "I want to engage with this conversation, but not in the way people expect. Let's focus on curiosity and the questions that unite us." By the end of the day, Musk had agreed to a rare interview with a prominent journalist, where he planned to address the incident. He didn't intend to give definitive answers. He didn't have them. But he wanted to encourage people to think critically and ask their own questions. Meanwhile, Musk quietly instructed his assistant to find a way to reach Abigail and her family. He wanted to thank her personally, not for challenging him, but for reminding him of something he'd nearly forgotten: the power of a simple question to ignite big ideas. The next morning, Musk met with his executive team. "Let's take a different approach," he said. "I want to engage with this conversation, but not in the way people expect. Let's focus on curiosity and the questions that unite us." By the end of the day, Musk had agreed to a rare interview with a prominent journalist, where he planned to address the incident. He didn't intend to give definitive answers. He didn't have them. But he wanted to encourage people to think critically and ask their own questions. Meanwhile, Musk quietly instructed his assistant to find a way to reach Abigail and her family. He wanted to thank her personally, not for challenging him, but for reminding him of something he'd nearly forgotten: the power of a simple question to ignite big ideas. Unbeknownst to him, Abigail had already started writing a letter to Musk, hoping to explain why she had asked the question in the first place. As two unlikely figures at the center of a cultural storm, their paths were about to cross in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The ripple effects of Abigail's question to Elon Musk continued to swell, turning into a full-blown cultural tidal wave. Social media platforms became battlegrounds where science enthusiasts, religious advocates, and everyone in between weighed in on the incident. Memes featuring Abigail asking Musk about God began circulating, some lighthearted and others pointedly mocking either Musk's agnosticism or Abigail's faith. News outlets seized the moment, amplifying the debate. Morning shows featured theologians and scientists debating the compatibility of faith and science. Podcasts dissected the cultural significance of a child confronting one of the world's most famous innovators. Opinion columns flooded the internet, with some praising Abigail for her boldness and others accusing her of naivete or manipulation. In the middle of it all was Abigail, a 10-year-old girl, trying to navigate an unexpected storm. At home, the Wright family faced an influx of attention they were ill-prepared for. The phone rang constantly, and emails poured in from well-wishers, critics, and media outlets requesting interviews. One letter addressed to Abigail stood out. It was handwritten with elegant penmanship and came from a scientist who admired both Musk and the little girl's courage. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten," the letter read. "We can look at the stars and feel awe, whether through the lens of science or faith. Thank you for asking a question that so many adults are afraid to ask." While some letters brought encouragement, others were. Abigail's mother shielded her from the most vitriolic messages, but the whispers of criticism still seeped through. Some accused Abigail of being a puppet for her parents' beliefs, while others questioned the appropriateness of her question at a scientific event. A viral blog post titled, "Why a 10-year-old Shouldn't Be Challenging Elon Musk," garnered both applause and backlash. Meanwhile, religious organizations began reaching out to Abigail's parents, offering her platforms to speak at churches and conferences. The family declined most invitations, wary of letting Abigail become a pawn in larger agendas. Still, they couldn't escape the fact that Abigail had inadvertently become a symbol for something far beyond her control. At school, the atmosphere was tense. Some of Abigail's classmates treated her like a celebrity, asking for selfies and congratulating her on going viral. Others were less kind. During lunch, a group of older students loudly mocked her, mimicking her question in exaggerated tones. Abigail tried to ignore them, but their words stung. "Don't let them get to you," her best friend, Mia, said, sitting beside her. "They're just jealous they weren't brave enough to ask anything." Abigail nodded, but the weight of it all was beginning to show. At home that evening, she asked her parents, "Did I do something wrong? Everyone's arguing, and I don't even know if my question mattered." Her father knelt beside her, his voice steady. "You asked a question that mattered to you, Abigail, and that's more than most people ever do. What happens after that isn't on you." While Abigail struggled with the attention, Elon Musk found himself at the center of the storm as well. His tweet had only intensified the debate, drawing both praise and criticism. Some accused him of sidestepping the question, while others applauded his effort to bridge the divide between science and faith. A prominent astrophysicist wrote an op-ed defending Musk, arguing that agnosticism was a valid and intellectually honest stance. Musk's office fielded countless requests for interviews, but he turned most of them down, preferring to let the noise die down. Yet, privately, the incident stayed with him. He couldn't shake the thought of Abigail's question or the earnestness in her voice. It was rare for someone to challenge him in such a disarming way, and it left him reflecting on his own beliefs or lack thereof. Publicly, the debate continued to escalate. Online forums hosted heated arguments about the nature of belief, the role of science in understanding the universe, and whether Musk's agnosticism undermined his vision for humanity's future. Hashtags like Faith and Science and Ask Big Questions trended for days, with people sharing their own thoughts on the intersection of spirituality and exploration. In the midst of the chaos, a quiet moment emerged. One evening, Abigail sat by her window, staring up at the stars. She thought about the universe Musk had described during the event. Vast, infinite, and filled with mysteries yet to be uncovered. Then, she thought about her own question and realized something. She didn't regret asking it. No matter what people said, the question wasn't just for Musk. It was for everyone, herself included. Little did Abigail know, her story was far from over. Behind closed doors, Musk was preparing to take a step he rarely took, reaching out directly. And as the world continued to debate, the little girl with big questions was about to find herself face to face with the man who had inspired them. The world outside Abigail's home buzzed with relentless noise, headlines, debates, and viral posts. But within the walls of her modest suburban house, a quieter, more personal storm brewed. Abigail Wright, who had always been confident in her curiosity and love for the stars, now found herself doubting the very question that had made her famous. Sitting on the edge of her bed one evening, she stared at her notebook, which was open to a blank page. Normally, it was filled with her sketches of rockets, planets, and constellations, accompanied by questions she wanted to explore. But tonight, her pen hovered above the paper, unmoving. She couldn't think of anything to draw, and for the first time, she didn't feel like asking questions. Abigail. Her mother's voice came from the doorway. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart." "I'm not hungry," Abigail replied, her voice quiet. Her mother stepped into the room and sat beside her. "Want to talk about it?" Abigail shrugged. I didn't think it would be like this. I thought asking a question was supposed to be a good thing, but now everyone's fighting, and some people are saying mean things about me. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything." Her mother pulled her into a gentle hug. "Honey, asking questions is always a good thing, but sometimes big questions make people uncomfortable. That's not your fault. It just means the question was important." Abigail sniffled. "But what if I was wrong? What if I shouldn't have asked him about God? He's so smart and I'm just a kid. Maybe I don't know enough to ask questions like that." Her mother leaned back and looked her in the eye. "You don't have to be an adult or a scientist to ask meaningful questions. Your voice matters just as much as anyone else's, and it's okay to not have all the answers. Even the smartest people in the world don't have them." Later that night, Abigail's father joined her by the window, where she often gazed at the stars. He brought along his telescope, a cherished gift from Abigail's grandfather. Together, they set it up and took turns peering into the night sky. Her father pointed out Jupiter, its moons faintly visible through the lens. "Did you know," he began, "that Galileo, the man who discovered those moons, faced a lot of criticism for his ideas? People didn't like that he challenged what they thought they knew about the universe. But he kept asking questions anyway, and now the whole world knows his name." Abigail looked up at him, her curiosity flickering back to life. "Really? Really?" her father said, smiling. "Asking questions is how we grow, Abigail. It's how we understand more about the universe and about ourselves. Don't let anyone make you feel small for being curious." Inspired by her parents' words, Abigail decided to write down what she was feeling. She picked up her notebook and started jotting down her thoughts about the universe, about Musk's answer, and about why she had asked the question in the first place. The words came slowly at first, but soon her pen was flying across the page. "I think science and faith can work together," she wrote. "When I look at the stars, I feel awe. Isn't that what both science and God are about? Wonder and awe? Maybe Mr. Musk doesn't believe in God because he's so busy trying to understand everything. But what if understanding and believing can be the same thing?" The act of writing gave her a sense of clarity. She didn't need to have all the answers. She just needed to keep asking questions. That was enough. At school the next day, Abigail's resolve was tested again. During lunch, a group of classmates approached her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Abigail," one of them said, "why do you care so much about what Musk thinks? He's like the smartest guy ever. Isn't it obvious he knows more than you?" Abigail hesitated, but then she remembered her father's words. "It's not about who knows more," she said, her voice steady. "It's about asking questions. Even Mr. Musk doesn't know everything. No one does." Her response silenced them, and for the first time in days, Abigail felt a flicker of pride. She didn't need to have all the answers to stand by her question. That evening, she finished writing a letter to Musk, pouring out her thoughts about science, faith, and the wonder of the universe. "Dear Mr. Musk," she began, "thank you for answering my question at the SpaceX event. I didn't mean to make anyone upset. I just wanted to know what you thought because you inspire so many people, including me. I think science and faith can both teach us about the universe. I hope we can keep asking questions together." Little did Abigail know, her letter would soon reach Musk himself, setting the stage for a conversation that would change them both. It had been weeks since the viral SpaceX event, and though the online debate around Abigail's question continued to simmer, life in the Wright household was beginning to settle down, at least on the surface. Abigail spent her evenings stargazing with her telescope, sketching constellations in her notebook, and occasionally peeking at her father's laptop, where news articles about her encounter with Elon Musk still lingered. She wasn't sure how much longer her question would matter to people, but for her, it still burned brightly. Then, one quiet afternoon, a sleek, black envelope arrived in the mail. Abigail's mother handed it to her with a curious expression. "It's addressed to you," she said, watching as Abigail carefully tore it open. Inside was a letter on SpaceX letterhead. "Dear Abigail, your question at the SpaceX event sparked an important conversation, one that has stayed with me since that night. I admire your courage and curiosity, and I'd like to invite you and your family to visit SpaceX headquarters for a tour. Perhaps we can discuss some of your thoughts about science and faith in person. I look forward to meeting you again. Warm regards, Elon Musk." Abigail stared at the letter, her heart racing. "Mom, Dad, he wants to meet me." Her parents exchanged a look of cautious excitement. They knew how much this meant to Abigail, but they also worried about the attention it might bring. Still, they agreed to the visit, seeing it as a chance for Abigail to find some closure and perhaps inspiration. A week later, the Wright family arrived at SpaceX headquarters, where they were greeted by a member of Musk's team. The building was a marvel of modern technology, its sleek, futuristic design hinting at the innovation taking place within. Abigail clutched her notebook tightly as they were led through the facility, her eyes wide as she took in the massive rocket parts, bustling engineers, and walls lined with SpaceX mission patches. Finally, they entered a small conference room where Elon Musk was waiting. He stood as they entered, extending a hand to Abigail. "It's nice to see you again, Abigail," he said with a smile. "Thanks for coming." Abigail nodded shyly, her earlier confidence momentarily replaced by awe. Musk gestured for everyone to sit, and after some introductions and small talk, he turned to Abigail. "So," he said, leaning forward, "you asked me a big question that night. I've been thinking about it ever since. What made you want to ask it?" Abigail hesitated, then opened her notebook to the page where she'd written her thoughts. "I love space," she began, her voice steadying as she spoke. "I think it's amazing how much there is to learn about the universe. But sometimes, when I look at the stars, I feel like there's something more, something bigger than all of us. I wanted to know if you feel that way, too." Musk listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "I do feel that way sometimes," he admitted. "When I look at the vastness of space, it's hard not to wonder about the big questions. Where we come from, why we're here. But I've always focused on what I can see and measure. It's how I make sense of the world." Abigail nodded, encouraged by his honesty. "I think science and faith can work together," she said. "Science helps us understand how things work, but faith helps us think about why they matter." Musk smiled. That's an interesting perspective, Abigail. Most people think they have to choose one or the other, but maybe you're right. Maybe they're two sides of the same coin. The conversation continued, weaving between topics of space exploration, the ethics of innovation, and the role of wonder in driving human progress. Musk shared stories from his childhood, admitting that he'd once been fascinated by the philosophical questions Abigail was asking. Abigail, in turn, asked him about his dreams for the future and how he dealt with people doubting his ideas. As the meeting came to an end, Musk surprised Abigail by offering to show her something special. He led the Wright family to a private viewing area where a prototype of the next-generation SpaceX rocket was being prepared. Abigail's eyes lit up as she examined the massive structure, asking questions that even some of the engineers found insightful. Before they left, Musk handed Abigail a small token, a SpaceX mission patch. "This is for you," he said, "to remind you to keep asking questions, no matter how big they seem." Abigail beamed, clutching the patch tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Musk. I'll never stop." As the Wright family drove home that evening, Abigail felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. Her question had sparked a global conversation. Yes, but it had also led to something more meaningful. A connection between two very different minds, both driven by curiosity and wonder. And as she looked out the car window at the night sky, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her questions, no matter how small, could make a difference. The photo hit social media before Abigail Wright and her family had even made it home. A SpaceX engineer had snapped it during the private tour. A candid shot of Abigail and Elon Musk standing beneath the towering prototype rocket, both gazing up at the massive structure. Musk had his arms crossed, a small, contemplative smile on his face, while Abigail clutched her notebook, eyes wide with wonder. The image was captioned simply, "Curiosity unites us." Within hours, the photo went viral. Unlike the heated debates sparked by Abigail's initial question, the image seemed to shift the tone of the conversation. It captured something universal, the shared human awe for the mysteries of the universe. People on both sides of the faith versus science debate began to see Abigail and Musk's interaction not as a confrontation, but as a bridge between two seemingly opposing perspectives. The next day, Elon Musk held an impromptu press conference. Standing in front of the SpaceX headquarters, he addressed the reporters who had gathered to question him about his recent meeting with Abigail. "I've spent my life chasing the stars," he began, his tone measured and thoughtful. "I've built rockets, dreamed of colonizing Mars, and focused on pushing the boundaries of what humanity can achieve. But sometimes, in all that striving, we forget to stop and ask why we're doing it." Abigail reminded me of that. She reminded me that curiosity isn't just about what we can measure. It's also about what we can imagine and believe. The reporters were stunned into silence, unused to hearing Musk speak with such vulnerability. He went on to describe his meeting with Abigail, praising her for her courage and insight. "We talked about big questions, the kind of questions that don't have easy answers. And what I realized is that it's okay not to have all the answers. What matters is that we keep asking." Musk's remarks were broadcast live, and the public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Commentators on both sides of the debate praised his willingness to engage with Abigail and to acknowledge the importance of curiosity in all its forms. For the first time since the viral event, it seemed like the world was finding common ground. Abigail, meanwhile, returned to school with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She wasn't sure how her classmates would react to her meeting with Musk, but to her surprise, many of them were supportive. Even the boy who had teased her earlier approached her at lunch. "Hey, Abigail," he said awkwardly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "That picture of you and Musk was pretty cool. I guess it's kind of awesome that you got to talk to him." Abigail smiled. "Thanks," she said. "It was pretty awesome." At home, the Wright family was inundated with messages of support. Letters and emails poured in from people around the world, thanking Abigail for inspiring them to think more deeply about the universe and their place in it. One letter came from a university professor who had shown the photo to his students, using it as a starting point for a discussion about the intersection of science, philosophy, and spirituality. Even with all the positivity, Abigail remained grounded. She spent her evenings writing in her notebook, jotting down new questions and ideas inspired by her conversation with Musk. She thought about what he had said about curiosity being the key to understanding, and how it mirrored her own belief that faith and science could coexist. Later that week, Abigail was invited to speak at her local library's youth astronomy club. At first, she was nervous, unsure if she had anything important to say, but as she stood in front of the small group of children and their parents, she realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. All she needed was her curiosity. Sometimes the best questions don't have answers, she told the group, her voice steady. But that doesn't mean we should stop asking. Whether it's about science, faith, or the stars, the important thing is to keep wondering. That's how we learn and grow. The audience erupted into applause, and Abigail felt a warmth she couldn't quite describe. She had started asking questions for herself, but now she realized that her curiosity had sparked something bigger, a conversation that could inspire others to ask their own questions. As the library event ended, a local journalist approached Abigail and her parents. "Do you have a message you'd like to share with the world?" he asked. Abigail thought for a moment before answering. "I think science and faith aren't enemies. They're just different ways of exploring the same wonder. We don't have to choose one. We can embrace both." Her words made headlines and the world took notice. For Abigail, though, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about staying true to the questions that had always driven her. And as she looked up at the night sky that evening, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that her curiosity had brought her closer to understanding, not just the universe, but herself. As the dust began to settle from her unexpected encounter with Elon Musk, Abigail found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed. The debates and headlines, once overwhelming, had started to fade into the background. What remained was a quiet but powerful realization. Her question had sparked something meaningful, not just in the world around her, but within herself. At school, Abigail noticed a subtle shift in the way her classmates treated her. The initial teasing had given way to curiosity and even admiration. During science class, one of her peers, a usually reserved boy named Ethan, approached her with a question about the stars. "Abigail," he said hesitantly, "I was reading about black holes. Do you think there's anything spiritual about them? Like, could they be more than just science?" The question caught her off guard, but she smiled. "Maybe," she replied thoughtfully. "Black holes are mysterious, and we don't know everything about them yet. That's what makes them so cool. There's always more to learn." For the first time, Abigail realized that her curiosity had become contagious. She wasn't just asking questions anymore. She was inspiring others to do the same. It was a strange but wonderful feeling, knowing that her simple act of speaking up had started a ripple effect. At home, she began to explore her interests more deeply. She spent hours reading books about astronomy and philosophy, borrowing titles from her school library and downloading articles online. One evening, her father found her at the kitchen table, her notebook open and filled with diagrams and questions. "What are you working on?" he asked, peering over her shoulder. "I'm trying to figure out how to explain my thoughts about science and faith," Abigail said, her pencil tapping against the page. "I think they're connected, but I don't know how to put it into words." Her father smiled, pulling up a chair. "Those are big questions, Abigail. Even adults spend their whole lives thinking about them. The important thing is that you're asking." Encouraged by her father's words, Abigail decided to start a small community group at her local library. She called it Star Seekers, a space for kids and adults alike to come together and discuss astronomy, philosophy, and spirituality. With her parents' help, she created flyers and handed them out at school and around town. The first meeting was small, just a handful of people, including her best friend, Mia, and a few curious neighbors. But as the weeks went on, the group grew. Parents brought their children, teachers recommended the meetings to their students, and even a local pastor attended out of curiosity. Abigail led discussions about the wonders of the universe, encouraging everyone to share their thoughts and questions, no matter how big or small. One evening, during a particularly lively discussion about the possibility of life on other planets. An older woman in the group raised her hand. "Abigail," she said, her voice warm, "what do you think is the most important thing we've learned from all of this?" Abigail paused, her green eyes thoughtful. "I think the most important thing is that we're all connected," she said. "Whether we're talking about science or faith, we're all looking at the same stars, asking the same questions. It's like we're part of something bigger." The room fell silent for a moment, her words sinking in. Then, one by one, the group members nodded in agreement. Abigail felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her simple question had brought people together in a way she hadn't imagined. Meanwhile, Elon Musk had continued to reflect on their meeting. In interviews and public appearances, he began to speak more openly about the importance of wonder and curiosity in driving innovation. "Curiosity is what makes us human," he said during a keynote speech at a technology conference. "It's what pushes us to explore the unknown. And sometimes it takes a little girl asking a big question to remind us of that." The impact of their exchange reached far beyond Abigail's small town. Schools across the country started using her story as an example of how curiosity and courage could spark meaningful conversations. Teachers encouraged their students to think critically about the world around them, blending science with philosophical and ethical questions. For Abigail, the journey was far from over. As she sat in her bedroom one evening, staring up at her glow-in-the-dark stars, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't have all the answers. She wasn't sure if she ever would. But she knew one thing: asking the right questions could change the world. And that, she realized, was more than enough. Despite the positive momentum surrounding Abigail's story and her newfound role as a bridge between science and faith, not everyone was ready to embrace the unity her question symbolized. As the public began to move on from the viral event, a darker undercurrent of criticism and cynicism resurfaced, targeting both Abigail and Elon Musk. The backlash began subtly, with anonymous social media accounts reigniting old debates. A popular skeptic blog published a scathing article titled, "Exploiting Curiosity: How a Child's Question Became a PR Stunt for Elon Musk." The piece claimed that Musk's meeting with Abigail was nothing more than a calculated move to soften his image and distract from controversies surrounding SpaceX's latest environmental impact report. The accusations gained traction, with some commentators questioning Musk's motives. Abigail's family also found themselves in the crosshairs. A viral conspiracy theory suggested that Abigail's parents had orchestrated the entire event to promote their religious beliefs. Anonymous users on forums shared distorted photos of the Wright family and speculated about their ties to local churches. Some accused Abigail of being a pawn, too young to understand the weight of her question or its implications. For Abigail, the renewed scrutiny was confusing and hurtful. At school, whispers started again, this time more malicious. One day during lunch, a classmate threw a crumpled note onto her tray. Opening it, she read the words, "You're just a puppet." Abigail's chest tightened, and she felt tears prick her eyes. She didn't understand why people were so determined to tear her down. That evening, she brought the note to her parents. "Why do they hate me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything wrong." Her mother pulled her into a hug, while her father sat beside her, his brow furrowed in thought. "Abigail," he said gently, "sometimes when people don't understand something, they lash out. Your question made people think, and not everyone is comfortable with that. But that doesn't mean you're wrong for asking it." Her mother added, "You've inspired so many people, Abigail. Don't let a few loud voices drown out all the good you've done." Elon Musk, too, faced renewed criticism. A former SpaceX employee published a damning op-ed accusing him of using Abigail as a distraction from internal company issues. In a rare moment of defensiveness, Musk responded directly on Twitter, "Abigail Wright is not a pawn. She's a courageous young girl who asked a thoughtful question. Dismissing her curiosity is a disservice to us all." The tweet went viral, sparking yet another wave of debate. While many applauded Musk for standing up for Abigail, others doubled down on their critiques. Abigail's name trended again, this time accompanied by hashtags like #LeaveHerAlone and #ChildNotSymbol. Amid the chaos, Abigail found comfort in her Star Seekers group. At one meeting, she confided in the group about the recent backlash. "It feels like no matter what I say or do, someone's going to be mad at me," she admitted, her voice heavy with frustration. One of the group's members, a retired professor named Dr. Mallister, spoke up. "Abigail," he said, his tone kind but firm, "you've done something remarkable. You've sparked a conversation that people are still talking about. That's not easy, and it's not always pleasant. But history shows us that the people who ask the hardest questions often face the harshest criticism. Don't let it stop you." Encouraged by his words, Abigail decided to focus on the positive. She threw herself into her astronomy studies, writing more in her notebook and planning new activities for the Star Seekers. She also began corresponding with other young people around the world who had reached out to her, sharing their own stories of curiosity and wonder. One evening, Abigail's father handed her a package that had arrived in the mail. Inside was a framed letter from the director of a prestigious science museum. The letter thanked Abigail for inspiring a new exhibit, titled Questions That Shaped the Future, dedicated to exploring the intersection of science, philosophy, and faith. The exhibit's centerpiece was a replica of the SpaceX prototype rocket, accompanied by a plaque bearing Abigail's now famous question, "What about the one who created it?" Abigail stared at the letter, her heart swelling with pride. Despite the criticism, she realized that her question had left an indelible mark on the world. It wasn't about winning debates or pleasing everyone. It was about opening minds and encouraging others to wonder. As she hung the letter on her bedroom wall, Abigail felt a renewed sense of purpose. The critics might strike again, but she knew now that their voices didn't define her. What mattered was her curiosity, her courage, and the knowledge that her question had inspired countless others to look up at the stars and ask their own. Years later, Abigail Wright sat in the audience of a packed auditorium, a mix of nostalgia and pride washing over her. The event was one of many she had attended over the years, but this one held particular significance. It was the unveiling of a groundbreaking international project, a joint initiative between leading scientists, philosophers, and theologians to explore the intersections of science, spirituality, and humanity's search for meaning. And at the heart of it all was a single spark, the question Abigail had asked as a 10-year-old girl. Abigail, now 22 and a budding astrophysicist, watched as Elon Musk took the stage. His hair was grayer, his movements a touch slower, but his presence was as commanding as ever. He looked out at the audience, his gaze settling on Abigail for a moment before he began to speak. Over a decade ago, Musk began, his voice measured and reflective. A little girl stood up at a SpaceX event and asked me a question that changed my life. She asked about God. At the time, I gave her a straightforward answer about my beliefs or lack thereof. But what I didn't realize then was how much her question would challenge me to think deeper, not just about the universe, but about my own purpose in exploring it. The crowd listened intently as Musk recounted their meeting and the cultural firestorm that followed. He spoke of how Abigail's question had forced him to reevaluate his approach to the known, blending his love for scientific discovery with a newfound respect for the mysteries that science alone couldn't explain. Abigail reminded me, and the world, that curiosity is the bridge between what we know and what we hope to understand, Musk said, his voice tinged with emotion. Her question wasn't just about faith or science. It was about the human spirit's endless drive to seek answers. The audience erupted into applause, and Abigail felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't expected Musk to speak so openly about their shared journey. It was humbling to know that her question, born out of childlike wonder, had resonated so deeply with one of the world's most influential figures. After the event, Abigail was invited backstage to speak with Musk. Their relationship, which had grown over the years through sporadic meetings and correspondence, was one of mutual respect and admiration. Musk greeted her warmly, a smile breaking across his face. "You've come a long way, Abigail," he said, shaking her hand. "How's the research coming along?" "It's incredible," she replied, her eyes lighting up. "I'm working on a project studying exoplanet atmospheres. We're trying to identify planets that could support life." Musk chuckled. "Still asking the big questions, I see." Abigail smiled. "I learned from the best." Their conversation was interrupted by a young girl who approached nervously, clutching a notebook much like the one Abigail had carried years ago. "Excuse me, Miss Wright," the girl said, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to say that you're the reason I want to study space. Your story inspired me." Abigail knelt to meet the girl's gaze, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. "Never stop asking questions, okay? That's how we find the answers." The girl nodded, her face glowing with excitement as she walked away. Musk watched the exchange with a knowing smile. "You've created your own ripple effect, Abigail. It's amazing to see." Later that evening, as Abigail sat by the window of her apartment, gazing up at the stars, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her 10-year-old self, the simple but profound question she had asked, and the unexpected path that had set her on. She thought about Musk, the critics, the supporters, and the countless people who had been inspired by the dialogue her question had sparked. Abigail pulled out her old notebook, its pages worn and filled with years of thoughts and questions. On the first page, she had written her now famous question, "What about the one who created it?" Below it, she added a new line, "What else can we discover if we never stop asking?" The stars outside her window twinkled as if in response, a silent reminder of the infinite mysteries waiting to be explored. Abigail smiled, knowing that her journey was far from over. The legacy she had built wasn't about finding answers. It was about inspiring others to join her in the search. And as long as there were stars in the sky, she would keep asking questions, knowing that curiosity was the greatest gift she could give the world.